Hey, everybody. Welcome to Improv FAQ at Length. This is a show where we have longer conversations about improv topics that have lots of questions surrounding them. And this is an episode that we're going to keep making our way through our list of suggested questions from our group of friends that were kind enough to make those suggestions. And the next question on our list is from Jen Clark, who asks, what's the best way to avoid trying to be funny in improv? And I do have a video on the main Improv FAQ page on this topic. It's mostly setting up why, like what the issue is, what the problem is, where it comes from for a lot of students. The idea of trying to be funny versus not trying to be funny in something that's supposed to be improv comedy. But I think it's definitely worth cracking into in more detail just to kind of unpack where that problem comes from and what are some different ways that you can substitute the idea of trying to be funny with some more positive or productive actions in your improv. So we'll crack into that.
Sounds good. Yeah, because it is. I don't want to call it a problem, but it's something we all have done.
Yeah,
maybe it's a bad habit. I think that'd be fair.
Well, it's I think a confusing expectation because students, right. It is by and large considered improv comedy. Certainly improv theaters, even places like IO or Annoyance Theater that don't have comedy in their names are still comedy clubs, still comedy theaters. And I think that a place like IO would say that like they're looking for truth more than they're looking for laughs. But what people go there for, I would have to imagine is the vast majority of people would say that they go there expecting to see a comedy show.
Right.
So, and then when you get into classes and you start learning, you feel like you got to say stuff that's funny, do stuff that's funny, make sure that you're being funny. And when you start getting the notes, it's like, well, then what the fuck am I doing if it's not comedy?
Right. Well, I know. And most of us start, depending on which school you go to, start with short form, which is all jokey. Almost it's a play on words. It's, coming up with characters who are fish out of water, which is always comedic. Like you're constantly for the first, if you're going through the first, 8 months, it's all, jokey jokes.
I know what you mean, but I think the toughest category of games in short form for that confusing joke mission or joke objective is the non-scenic games, because you have like line games that are really just setup and punchline improvised.
Okay.
And those and things like which are like battle games that are putting a spin on object work to be funny. I think scene work is a little bit easier to in short form still be like, okay, the goal is to do a good scene while also executing the rules of this game, and that's going to end up being funny without you having to force it that way.
There was this great show. It's an Aaron Sorkin show. It was Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
Yep.
Have you ever watched that?
Yeah.
So it's basically an SNL type situation. And actually, I'm going to give credit to Pete because he's the one that kind of got me into the show. And for this specific line, in the beginning, it's an SNL type situation, and the players are doing their run through. Yeah. And the lead of the show, who's also the lead of the made up SNL type show in the show, does a monologue or something, and during rehearsal it crushed. The second time she does it, it gets a laugh, but it wasn't like it was in rehearsal. And she goes up to the guy from Taxi. I don't know his name. He's a great actor though. Who's like the Laura Michaels of the show. And she's like, I don't get it. I said the same words and the material's funny. And he's like, well, the first time you made him laugh, the second time you asked him to laugh. And I think as performers, we really got to take that into consideration, because some of the times we're being funny or trying to do the joke is because it's coming from an insecure place.
Yeah.
They haven't laughed in a particular amount of beats, so I'm going to do something funny or do something weird and try to get a reaction because I need that. And I think that's where trying to be funny stops, or is a bad habit.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's really what it comes down to, is that I think we don't often, or I would guess that it's not always framed in the way of like, the goal of this is comedy. Let's not lie,
right,
or be misleading. Generally, for the most part, we want things to be comedy. What we want you to do is specifically stop trying to be funny, because it appears that you're trying to be funny, and that effort becomes disingenuous and undercuts the comedy of, well, really anything. Because I think that if you're trying too hard, whether it's a stand and deliver style joke like in a line game or in a scene, in a character moment, the effort behind trying to get funny or trying to be funny undercuts the potential of humor in that moment, and in either scenario, in any scenario. So stop trying to be funny.
Yeah.
And so again,
well, I mean, yeah,
go ahead.
The goal is to tell a good story. We're storytelling. We're doing plays that never been written. And yes, it leads toward comedic, but I think the goal should be to entertain. And sometimes you're going to have to take those long breaks between the funny parts to make the funny parts even funnier. And I think there's a pacing to that. And I think sometimes when we do those jokes, the insecure jokes, specifically, it ruins the pacing of the scene.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a stronger improviser just to let it breathe and have those moments. Those moments that we stumble upon because of truth, which is always a bigger, better laugh. Those moments when you get a laugh and you don't even know what you said, but for some reason the whole audience is cracking up because you said something honest. I think those are more valuable, and something that should be the focus. Not, did I say something clever?
Yeah, agreed. And so I think early on, the other thing to understand between distinguishing between trying to be funny and how that is different than like the medium that we're working with being, we still want it to be comedy, but how do you do that without trying to be funny? The first step is to focus on the things that are more fundamental, because people who are naturally funny, or maybe encouraged to take improv classes because they're funny amongst their friends and stuff, people are funny. People can be funny. What people have a harder time with than being funny is being comfortable on stage and under pressure, delivering a piece of theater or a piece of public speaking. And so you have to learn how to get comfortable on stage, comfortable in scene work, comfortable delivering it. So in short form, that translates to, or I should say in non-scenic short form, when you're doing line games and battle games or whatnot, that translates to committing to the bit, which is why we do things like experts as an exercise, where you're supposed to present yourself as an expert on something that you actually don't know anything about or much about, and being sincerely, comfortably, credibly committed to what you're saying regardless. And in scene work, in both short form and long form, you want to get comfortable with your acting and emotion.
When we talk about this, I think about like my niece and nephew when they were younger. I used to love to play improv games with them because you can't trip up a kid. Like, they're in that world where they just, everything they know is what the world is made of to them. So if you just walk into their tour room and they're in the middle of something like, hey, what would it be like to be a doctor? They'll drop everything, go into a doctor character and start delivering this monologue that will absolutely crush. And it's full of imagination.
Kids?
And it's, yeah, kids, like, oh my God, they're great. Oh yeah. You kind of like, you kind of have to give them a little instruction, like don't just draw a frog, draw a blue frog, and then let it go, and they'll come up with some amazing stories because they honor the rules and they play within them, but they also make it their own.
Okay,
and they're just making observations, and like they are the ultimate experts because they don't, they're kids, they don't know anything about anything. They think they do, and it's great. It's coming from a total place of honesty. It's so much fun to watch.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. When kids play make believe, they're not going for laughs. They're playing make believe. That's the goal, is to make believe, not to make people laugh. So it happens to get more. It tends to be an entertaining experience to watch. I mean, so where I got hung up is like, I'm not around kids a lot, but I've never seen a kid drop everything to monologue as a doctor.
Oh, you gotta like, you coach them into it. I swear to God, they're the best. And they take it serious too. Like, yeah, I am a doctor. You can't tell me, yeah. And I have laser eyes. What up?
Yeah.
That's how I do my surgery.
Yeah,
eyes.
Making believe is takes precedence over making the laughs. But so let's kind of talk mostly about scene work from here on out, because I think I'm kind of interested in these qualities of non-scenic games and more performing as yourself. But I think that's either a separate conversation or it tends to be a little bit easier more quickly, because what the main thing you have to do is get comfortable on stage, and just with enough reps, you're probably going to get more comfortable with those kinds of games naturally than you are with, I think the longer learning curve is with character and scene work. So let's maybe talk a little bit more about that, or focus on that from here on. Let's talk about acting and emotion, because I think in Jen's question, what's the best way to avoid trying to be funny? And so what I would offer up is something else to focus on instead of focusing on being funny, which is acting and specifically emotion. I think that if you're not getting laughs or the kind of joy of playing when you're improvising, and you find yourself kind of itching to push the funny button with something clever, I think that what you should do is make sure that you're being emotionally electric, because if you're putting emotion behind things, people love to see that, and that tends to be funny. You take any given line of dialogue and you deliver it as kind of like a straight character, versus like being frustrated about it, or even just like really happy about it, like a little like, well, I like this. Yeah. It's like you just make sure that you're giving emotion to everything, and I think that goes a long way to have funny moments as a character.
I agree. I think it was Rosowski. It's a Rosowski line. Treat little things as if they're big, and big things as if they're little, but truly believe it with your whole heart. Like something as simple like, was it Kumar and my man go to White Castle? Like having that goal, like, I want some White Castle. White Castle's like the worst burger. When you're sober.
Kumar and my man go to White Castle.
Man, I haven't seen that movie in like 10 years. That's my man, though. I suck at names.
I can't come up with it right now, but I just want to. It doesn't matter. I'd rather have it be called Kumar and my man.
I don't think that was going to fly over anybody's head. But like something that simple, like, oh my God, all I want right now is like the world's worst hamburger, and that's all I want. And it means so much to me that I'm willing to go through all this crap to get there. That's awesome. Just having that want, just having like a real emotion and having it be believable. Like that's great. And I think it's an honest emotion, because we all have things that we like, that we want, that might not make sense to everybody else in our lives. I remember when I started taking improv, that's not a real college, Bobby. It was something I heard, like, yeah, it's not, but I'm loving it. And now it's, oh, well.
Yeah. So what has been your experience, if you can remember, when you had to get over the initial hurdle, did you come into learning improv with this expectation of being funny and have to go through some growing pains of that effort?
Oh, total.
What was that
man.
like for you?
Yeah, it took a long time because I think at the time I was definitely one of those guys who were funny at work. So I would spend 11 hours at work being funny, doing not a lot, you're working at Ford, you're doing a repetitive job, you got to lighten up the mood. And I was the class clown. So realizing that when I'm on stage, that's no longer my job. My job is to tell a story was something I really had to learn. It was like one of the biggest lessons I had to learn. And I'm glad I learned it. It took me a minute, but I'm glad I learned it. And when I see that in others, I try to help them because I know how hard it was for me.
So if you see somebody like going for punchlines or jokes or just like putting on like a front of comedy person, what do you, how do you approach a student in the early levels or any level, I guess, if you see a student doing that, how do you kind of take a moment to be like, hey, I see what you're doing. Do you have a way to explain the difference in short?
Only through example. If they're doing a scene, I might let them have one, but I might do the wah wah sound effect while I'm taking notes, because that's the way I am. So that's an audio cue. Like, I'm gonna bookmark this for later. I'll let you continue your scene. If I notice like it's a habit they're having, I will stop the scene. Make the if depending on where it came in, maybe have the other people in the scene do their line again and have them reply in an honest way, or maybe even before that happens, like, hey, tell me who you are to these people. Why would that be a line of dialogue unless you're making a joke? Because sometimes the joke is a sincere like reaction that the character will have. Like if it's a deflective character, that might be a strong character choice, but I want to have the conversation with the person. Like, is this a choice or is this a knee-jerk reflex because you don't feel comfortable up here not telling a joke? Yeah. And just to know the difference and just to have those conversations. And anybody who's ever took a class from me has heard me say 1,000 times, like, we're not comedians, we're storytellers. So if you're telling a joke and it stops that story, you fucked up your job, Yeah,
it's tough though, because I think that the long term, okay, so I think Mick Napier in Behind the Scenes, the second Mick Napier book, one of the chapters is entirely on being funny and wanting to be funny. And I think that like for so long, the dominant schools of improv were kind of pushing down this idea or desire to be funny in people, and instead go truth in comedy and being real and honest and taking care of your scene partner, and that those things work by process, but that people would get like these negative side effects of forgetting that we do want to create a joyful, generally comedic experience for ourselves and for other people. And his whole point in the chapter is that like, it's okay to want to be funny. Let's take away the stigma of that, because there are people who are, like Middleditch Schwartz. They are so funny, and they clearly want their show to be a comedic experience, but it's not bad for them to want that outcome, obviously. So it's tough. Like, how do you reconcile the contradiction in that, or balance it with the note of we're not saying something like we're not comedians?
Well, I mean, taking those guys into consideration, like usually when they do make the joke, if they're making a joke, they pause the scene. It's usually when they're breaking the fourth wall. That's when the joking happens. But they had to get to the point where they could do a strong scene to pause it and and know how to do the joke in such a way where you could continue the scene and it's not a distraction. So that's a skill within itself, Yeah. And to me, like, they had to learn how to do the scene first. So if you're a student, learn how to do the scene first and know that this is a building block to have those awesome moments. And also, you are learning your voice. You're learning stage presence. You're learning how to tell a story. some of these jokes you're going for when it's a knee-jerk reaction is the first thing that everybody in the room thought of first. You're going for the easy joke. You're going for the low-hanging fruit. So maybe if you pump the brakes a little bit, you can think of the third or fourth joke that no one could reach because they haven't gone that far because it's, most people
or
don't
they're not
have
you,
that
and you have
mind.
a unique sensibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like when we play New Choice. The first answer is usually not the best one. When you get into that weird stuff where you're just digging, if you can get to that part, that's more interesting to me. So maybe you recognize in the scene that there's a need for that, but your first thought isn't the strongest joke. So maybe pumping the brakes a little bit, taking your time, you can find something that A is more interesting and B might actually work within the scene. So I think training your brain to recognize what does the scene need rather than I need a laugh is important as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is all about that foundation, and I think framing it that way goes a long way for students to understand the process of learning, not only the process of improv and where laughs tend to come from, but the process of learning being about getting comfortable first, tapping into your sense of play first, and then learning some general acting and theater skills, because you're right, Middleditch and Schwartz or any high-level performer that gets away with sneaking in quips or deviations from the base storyline and character and scene work, they're not a hot mess while they're doing it. They're keeping the baseline going and that foundation intact and able to do backflips on top of it, which is
Plus,
takes a long time to get to that point.
Yeah, but we have to be mindful. Those guys rehearse forever together. They've had a lot of stage time together. They have that shorthand. So it isn't a distraction when one of them makes a joke because the other one is so used to it. It's kind of like riding in your car with your best friend. You kind of just can have that banter in it and still keep on going. It's not as distracting.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no. Go with your thought. I'm gonna change.
I was just basically just echoing what you were just saying, that you and I can have this conversation or debates with people in the world of improv, and if you can have a good argument that is more of a conversation than it is an argument, what that takes is comfort with each other and not feeling like anyone has to go on the defensive or is being malicious. It's a mutual. It's a partnered conversation toward coming up with a good answer and sharing ideas. You know what I mean? That's just another kind of analogy to me, is that if you're getting into a conversation where you don't have that baseline, you're going to feel more threatened or thrown off versus having a good conversation where you can push back and forth more, and that takes chemistry and familiarity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I really enjoy playing with Peterson, when we do Wick and Peterson, is because we do have that. I respect Peterson so much, and I love being on stage with him. But me and him, I don't know, just because of where we grew up and just different backgrounds, and I think we see the world slightly different. I mean, not completely different, but just because we're two different human beings, we can have those kind of conversations. And sometimes our scenes look more like vaudevillian than written stories, and that's fine. It's part of the fun of playing with them. So yeah, I get what you're saying. As far as having putting that time to rehearse with a troupe or a person, you can make jokes and have a little more fun and get away with a little bit more without hurting the overall story. And I think people do enjoy that because we talking about Middleton and Schwartz. I always screw up stuff.
Middleditch and Schwartz.
Yeah.
Milton and Swatch.
I always want to call him Middleton for some. I don't know why. I never met a guy named Middleton, but I always want to. He doesn't look like a Middleton. I apologize. I respect the man, but I can't say his name worth to save my life. But those guys have spent the time. They've done the work, and with doing the work, it gives you a little more leeway.
Yeah.
But I want to switch gears. What about you? Because I've played with you a lot. And I wouldn't consider you jokey, but very playful. You like to, I don't know, you do, whether it was in your physicality or if you are taking the absurdity of a scene and heightening it. I think that's what you lean towards more. I wouldn't call you more of a jokester. But you have on several occasions broken me with this like a pure honest line. I'm thinking about like a Laughter House 5 moment that completely crushed me one time. It was just you just making observation. You're more of an observationalist, I would say.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, and I mean I appreciate the compliment, and I guess I think about one thing that I think about a lot in recent couple of years is the audience as a player in the room, and I think that I've always had an awareness, and I would guess most people do, of the audience's eye, and it's something that we try to shut off a lot. And I think, again, that's part of like the foundation and the early stages of getting comfortable and taking care of the most important job of improv, which is to be connected with your scene partner and comfortable in your own skin on stage. Once you do that, though, that awareness of the audience can kind of come back into play. And I think that like there's like me and you and the overhead view of what's going on in general when I improvise, and I try to I'm just like, I become aware of these different layers, and yeah, my sense of play draws me to things that are sometimes not about the scene. They're more about the fact that we're improvising in this way, or standing in this silly way, or the proximity, and the moment is just weird or unusual, and it's not about the scene context. It's about the stage and the improv context, and I try to play into that, and that will tend to play the audience a little bit. And I hope to do that in a way that is connecting all 3 points, myself, my scene partners, and the audience, so that none of those points, those 3 points, feel alienated by doing that. But yeah, sometimes that doesn't involve high integrity acting.
No, but you did mention something interesting, like the 3 points, you, us, and then the audience. And I think we don't just talk about discovery enough, and how important it is to try to discover, almost try to have everybody discover everything at the same time. And if we're doing jokes, that means you're thinking ahead or commenting, or, just losing that momentum in discovery. You're negating the discovery by commenting on the thing. The quickest way to kill a game is to explain the rules of that, because that kind of takes the fun out of it. Don't say it out loud, just play the game.
Totally. Yeah. So there's 2 things in there. So let's talk about discovery. What do you mean when you talk about discovery, when you say that?
Okay, so I guess not that I want it to be a goal, but I think some of the elements of a good story, since we're storytellers, is who we are to each other, location, premise, and the overall story. So discovering any of those during, rather than forcing it, or if we happen to forget to do something as simple as name each other, or solidifying any of those elements with a name, or, or ground it completely. Yeah. Or I think what Margaret calls it, like nailing the carpet to the floor. Discover, and maybe rediscover it's something else, like playing, kind of like when we play Oh Yeah, you think you're doing something, but someone can come along, and because you haven't named it, they can call it something completely different, and we both discover at the same time that it wasn't what we thought it was actually this thing, because now that it's named, it's solidified, we built it into our world, it's a truth, because this is what we promised the audience, and we should honor that. So like that organic discovery, I think it's important. And I think it's the awe factor in most improv sets. Like, where did they come up with this unusual, imaginative thing? Rather than, let's have a basic ass, man propose to women in a restaurant, and we're going to see all the tropes, Yeah.
Okay. So I understand. I think now, in the context of like being funny, or how you can get in the way of discoveries, you're saying that like to discover is as opposed to going in your head and being like, okay, who, what, where, what do I see? These are my, maybe we're at a grocery store or a pharmacy. I'm going to go with grocery store. Here's my line of dialogue. That's like, the supermarket's been smelling musty lately, whatever. You externalize an inside choice, and you go through this mental process of doing that versus like having this aha realization of what's going on, having it just come to you like magic, and then acting on that, well, for lack of a different term, discovery. And then having that back and forth. Sometimes those discovery moments come from me doing or behaving a certain way and you perceiving it differently than me. And
yes.
And then interpreting it and acting on it in a way that makes me go, oh, you think this, and then being like, oh, and now and all of a sudden we click in, and the audience clicks in with it as well. So does that line up with what you're saying?
Pretty much, because there's that, and there's also those honest moments we make a complete mistake where it's just a brain fart rather than an observation askewed. So like, which have like, for example, like if you're playing opposite sex. And I, sometimes it doesn't click in, there's that paradigm. Like I can see you, James, on stage. You are identifying as a male in our actor lives. So that's how I know you. It's, until you do something feminine or something that would make me believe that you're a female, or even if you are, sometimes it's hard to shake the webs out,
Sure.
So there's been those times like, I've seen this happen a couple times in scenes where a female's playing a male and they're like, where's dad at? And like, okay, well, I guess you have two dads now because I was playing the dad. And then you asked me where other dad is. So we're going to have to justify it. So we discovered Frankie has two dads. And that's awesome. That's what a fun discovery. It always gets a laugh because there's that moment where the person who said the thing that kind of hiccuped the scene realizes, oh, because I heard the audience laugh. So even the audience discovered it before the other performer or the performer itself. That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So there's those discoveries, and they're less likely to happen if you're constantly commenting on or slapping jokes on things. They're less likely to happen. Okay. So I think that's what we're talking about from that chunk there. The other thing I want to talk about is like, okay, how do you play the things that you realize? Because if you have this realization, you could literally, like you said, you don't want to call out the game. You want to play the game. Right. In most cases, or I would argue that there's more mileage in playing the game without naming it than there is in naming it. And so how do you, I think that in the question of like avoiding trying to be funny, one of the things that you can do is just hold on to something that you realize is funny or is a joke line that you feel that impulse to verbalize, and just hold on to it and use it in a different way. And it may put you in your head to say like, okay, I think that we're actually at a graveyard, and that's going to twist context or whatever, or maybe like we established that we're at a graveyard and this person's really happy, and instead of being like, you're really happy that we're at a graveyard, and then it's like, okay, because you named that, we might get a laugh. But instead, if you're like, oh, how can I use the fact that this character is happy and at a graveyard, is you either offer up more things that are morose and should be dark and solemn in hopes that your scene partner continues to act happy about it, or if you are the one that is happy and out of place, then you look for those triggers to keep responding that way. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. The whole, if this is true, what else is true? Which is another form of discovery. Like if you don't know, if you're starting from a place that's, I think it's true, is this also true? I guess would be the discovery version of that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. You're like, yeah, this is true. Now, what do I do? And what else is true? So it's like, it's just about patience. Maybe is that like, don't always jump on the first opportunity to call something out or to again, I always picture it as pushing the funny button. I don't know what that is. It's just like this impulse.
I like how you got like a physical funny button, like boop, it's right here. Mine's always been a push down, like don't push the funny button. Yours isn't? Okay. It's like a plunger, like
yeah. But you know what I mean? Like that's what the feeling is for me if I'm like, oh, I haven't gotten a laugh, or I think I can get a laugh, and that temptation for me to like do something funny about it. That to me is the idea of pushing the funny button. And instead, if I'm like, let me just take that in for a moment and now believe whatever I just realized and keep acting on it, knowing that that's now true, just act on it.
So that's a really good example. So what I'm thinking about when these kind of situations happen, using the graveyard guy for an example, is this what makes today different, or can we discover something new? And if this is a character who always like this, always likes these crazy, not crazy, but always likes graveyards or like dark things, if that's what brings them joy, like an Addams Family type character, then that's the norm for that. So that's not what makes a day different. So calling that out is weird because, if you know each other and if you're characters that care about each other, you should already know that about the character. So commenting on that would be unusual because you should have a background. Your characters should have backgrounds with each other and should know this about each other already. So that's not what makes the day different. That's who this character is. That's his backstory. So calling it out is kind of a jokey move, and it kind of hurts the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So maybe the last thing to touch on, because a lot of what we are offering here is very heady stuff about how to think about moments. And, I think that's the kind of stuff that like you do want to train yourself to think that way, and eventually know that that you won't have to put so much mental energy into it. But since it is so heady, I'm just looking for like what's a less heady answer to the question. And for me, it's that idea of just like,
go first, please.
Yeah. For me, it's just that idea of act with emotion. And I think that like, if you're doing that in a way that isn't like soap operatic, over the top, or to make sure that it's not too underwhelming, because I'm a pretty stoic person, and so some of the emotional conveyance that I think I'm doing is actually understated compared to what I'm feeling in my head or think that I'm expressing on the outside. And I think that one way that you can practice that, if you're interested in practicing it, is to work with monologues or voiceover, and to record yourself giving different emotional treatments on the same lines of dialogue. That can be a really great exercise for calibrating your own sense of what you're going for on the inside and how it's appearing on the outside.
That's cool.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, I completely agree. That's a great way to play, an honest way to play. And I think people do need to work on delivering emotion. Like sometimes that's what's missing from the scene the most, like the delivery of lines. Like, you're not delivering as if you believe this is true. Yes. So why should I invest as the viewer as if it, why should I suspend my disbelief when you haven't? And that's your job to do, Yeah. So I get it. So the simple answer is take a second and really think, is this what the scene needs? Or if you're having fun, like, are you willing to stop the scene right now? Because there's a good chance with this joke, you're going to kill the scene or end the scene. Killing is such a strong word, but you're going to end it right there. Are you going to deliver the button of the scene, and is it too soon? Yeah. Or are you purposely killing the scene because the scene doesn't have legs? It's up to you. It's your art. Do it the way you want, but try to tell the story as best as you can. Yeah. Are you looking for short-term payoff or long-term payoff? Right.
Long term is going to be generally more satisfying, and if you can just hold your tongue for a second, you might get bigger results in a couple more beats.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I think yeah. I think we got it.
See, we waited to the end of this podcast to make that bit. You're welcome.
So, I think that was definitely a good deeper look at the idea of trying to be funny, and hopefully it was helpful to anyone who was looking for some feedback on it or insight on it. Okay, I think that's a good place to end it, and good talking to you as always, Bob.
Always a pleasure, buddy. Good seeing you.
Yeah, and we will catch you next time on Improv FAQ at Length.